Okay, so how is the promo code shown at the beginning of the webinar redeemed? So you just go to the website, and when you sign up, and when you, like before you pay, I think you have like a little text box that will tell you where to type in the code, and that's it. Just keep in mind that it's valid in the next 7 days. Afterwards, it won't be. Hi, this is my first webinar. It's really interesting so far. I was wondering how long it is in total. Well, technically, it should be 45 minutes of me talking, but people who are returning listeners know that that really never happens. I usually talk about an hour, hour and 15, and then we spend as much time as needed for the Q&A. And you, since this is your first webinar, you can go to TrichStop's YouTube page. You will receive a link to it in a day or two, I think, and you can listen to other webinars as well. I'm a budding mental health counselor from Pennsylvania, currently finishing up undergrad this coming semester, and we will be beginning my graduate program in the spring. I've always had a strong desire to help people heal and be their best version of themselves, and also battle with my trich every day. And naturally, those with trich are a demographic I really want to work with in my career. It's a very narrow demographic, and I know there isn't a trichotillomania counselor, so how would you suggest to try to work with this demographic? So when you become a licensed counselor, check out if TrichStop is employing new therapists, and you can join the team. That's one thing. And second of all, I don't think the population, the demographic is as narrow as you think. I forgot, I was a couple of months ago when we talked about scientific studies of trichotillomania. Someone might remind me which webinar that was. I don't remember. I think it was in April, or no, it was May or June. I'm not sure. Anyway, I was talking about some statistics, and it's far more common than we think. The trouble is that people are usually just too ashamed to talk about it. So one thing that maybe you can do is, there's something that I would do if I had the time and if I wasn't lazy or just like sleep, is that I would make an online resource for trichotillomania, because there really isn't much. And once you start working as a therapist, people will kind of, I guess when it comes to recommending marketing strategies, I suck at that, to be perfectly honest. I work with TrichStop. Before that, I had my own, I mean, I still have my own private practice. And how I built my practice was that I started with one client, and then that client recommended me to another client, and then to another client, and that's how you build your practice. So it is a process that takes time, but it will work. And you don't have to specialize in trichotillomania, but what you can do is try to write blog posts about it. If you struggle with trichotillomania, maybe it's also okay that you share a part of your story online as well. I know that there's a lot of audience for it. So when we started doing these webinars, we didn't really know that there would be anyone interested in it. And then the first webinar, I think, I never look at how many people are there, because I would have to pull down the window, and I just don't do it. And then someone told me from TrichStop that the first webinar or something was that there was like 400 people attending it. And I thought, oh, well, that's why I was answering questions forever. But my point is that people will actively seek you out once you make it sort of public that that's what you do. I don't by any means specialize only in trichotillomania, but precisely because there aren't many therapists who deal with this topic, slowly my clients who were in touch with other people through support groups and stuff like this, they kind of started recommending me. So I built my experience also in this area. I'm sorry I'm rambling, but that's about as, when it comes to advertising, I'm completely the wrong address. What do you mean regarding competing responses when stating to combine them with mindfulness? Could you provide an example? Yes, I can. So what I was talking about is that just practicing mindfulness every day is great, it's excellent, but that alone is not going to stop you from pulling. So mindfulness will help you be more aware of the urges to pull. It will help you be more aware of your stress levels, your anxiety levels. So that's a direct benefit of mindfulness. Now, when you become aware of it, it's not enough to say, I will just observe my urge until it goes away. There are some people who can do that. I currently have a client who's capable of doing that, and that's highly impressive. But most people will still need a competing response, because sometimes the urge will pass away very quickly, but sometimes it will stick around for 30 minutes, for example. And it's very hard to sit and observe the urge for 30 minutes. That's why as soon as you become aware of it, apply a competing response and just be done with it. So, but I was talking about sort of how awareness is a long-term benefit of practicing mindfulness. Good evening. Well, good evening to you too. How did you start being? How did I start? Oh, how did I start practicing mindfulness? So that was not on purpose, I have to say. When I was in high school, there was a class that I was really bored with, and there was someone doing their master's degree or a PhD, and they wanted to see what the effects of mindfulness on studies and learning, on studying and learning is. And so people asked who would like to learn how to meditate, and I said I would. Basically, I would have accepted to do anything except sit in class. And so they taught me that. I really enjoyed it. To me, it was an eye-opening experience at the time. But because I was a teenager, I had other things to do in my life, and then I kind of forgot about mindfulness. And when I was in medical school, I came back to it because I really needed something to help me focus and recharge and de-stress. And I remembered how wonderful it felt. And then I started meditating and, well, never looked back. Wonder, would your slides be available to download or receive through email? In a day or two, I'm not sure when, because that's not something I do, but I will record this whole webinar, and it will be uploaded to YouTube, and then someone will send you links, so you will be able to download it. Hi there, my hair pulling is pretty much constant. There is virtually no minute of the day when I do not touch or pull my hair. Is there any point in awareness practices with me? I'm most often aware that I'm doing it, but it is such an ingrained habit, addiction, that despite being aware that I'm doing it, I will not stop. I have found the habit-aware buzzing wristband ineffective for this reason, because it is not that I'm unaware, I just can't conjure up the discipline to not do it. It takes too much energy, and when I'm working or reading or something that requires focus, I can't afford to take that energy concentrating on not picking. Picking for me is also about emotional processing, and this is when I think like a filing cabinet, when I go through all my thoughts. Will mindfulness work for me, do you think? So you can for sure benefit from practicing mindfulness. If that's a way, so I'm so sorry, but I read and forgot half of your. So mindfulness will definitely help you focus better. That's something that it will do. But reading what you wrote here, it seems like willingness is the issue, not necessarily anything else. Because from what you told me, pulling your hair actually works for you. And that's the reason why you're not stopping it. You said you wrote something along the lines that it's just much easier to just pull and then focus in peace rather than waste your energy to resist it. To me, that's the topic that I would actually explore a little more. How much are you willing to invest in your change at this time? Sometimes it happens that even though people know that pulling is not something they should be doing, they still pull because they're just not ready to change. They're not ready to invest the energy that's required. I don't know of any type of relevant psychological change that comes easy and that comes quickly. So whatever you try to change, there will always be this energy that you have to invest. That is the price of change. If you're not willing to pay that price now, that's okay. But that means that you're not willing to pay that price now. That's more of a conscious decision than anything else. I don't mean to be mean to you or to offend you in any way, but that's just the impression that I'm getting from what you wrote. Maybe for now, to stop yourself from picking, you can focus on other behavioral techniques. And more specifically, what I'm thinking about is stimulus control. So that's the the second component of habit reversal training, which is to use different types of approaches to modify your environment so that the urge doesn't arise, or so that you're unable to pull. So if you I don't know, need to concentrate and you pull to concentrate, you can wear gloves, for example. That will often stop you from pulling. Depending on where you pull, for example, you can wear false eyelashes because you can't pull those. You can wear a hat or something like this to kind of physically prevent yourself from pulling. But the main thing to explore is what's stopping you from investing the energy now, if change is what you want. And second of all, if you pick all the time, I agree, it is a habit, but habits are not formed for no reason. It's like saying that, kidney just works because it's bored and is just used to working. No, it has a very important function to perform. And the same goes with pulling. So maybe you can explore a little bit what's underneath the pulling. Are you anxious? Are you stressed? What is it that you're trying to avoid? What types of experiences are you not willing to face? And then go from there and dig a little deeper and see what's behind why you have to constantly be. Why is it that this habit still has a job to do, under quotation marks? I've been suffering from trich for about 2 years now. I would like to bring light to what happened recently. I had stopped pulling my hair for quite a while. One night I pulled my lashes and eyebrows and hair from my scalp. Also, I was on my period then. Does it have anything to do with my hair pulling? So if you're asking me if pulling your eyelashes and eyebrows is a type of hair pulling, absolutely. Is this just a one-off thing? That's also possible. Just because you had a small relapse, you allow me to define it that way, it doesn't mean that you will go back to pulling now permanently. Actually, now is exactly the right time for you to do whatever you did the last time to stop. Do it now to reinforce your progress. And then after a couple of days or a week, try to go back to what was happening when you were pulling. If this is something that you associate with period, because I mean, obviously I don't have period, but working with clients, I learned that periods will affect emotionally, every person differently. So if that's something that has to do with your emotional state because you have your period, then maybe every month you can implement strategies to prevent yourself from pulling further. But one small relapse is not necessarily the end of the world. Sometimes it happens that people will not pull for a year or 2 or 3, and then in a particularly stressful situation, they will kind of bring pulling back just for that specific instance. This is because all behaviors don't really die, they just get deactivated. And then in certain situations, when this is the only resource that you can reach, then you will reach for it. I don't know if that makes sense to you. It's kind of like people who don't smoke for 20 years and then when they lose their jobs, suddenly they feel the urge to smoke because nothing in this world would calm them the way a cigar would. So that's the same mechanism, basically. I have found a great self-compassion skills book by Tim Desmond. I feel a little overwhelmed or have trouble staying committed without a guide or a teacher. Any recommendations? Yeah, this is very, very common. And sometimes when people will write me and they will say that they don't want to pay for the program, but they will still ask me for advice or to recommend books about hair pulling. And then I will recommend books and then they will come back and say, yeah, that's really good, but can I find a therapist after all or join the program? It is really hard, not just for pulling, but also for mindfulness itself to stay motivated and committed. Luckily, when it comes to mindfulness, you have so many resources out there. There are free meditation groups. Now in the times of COVID, you have them online. I learned recently that Tara Brach has a meditation group that meets once a week. So that's something that you can do. If you have friends that are interested in mindfulness, you can meet once a week and then commit to daily practice and then discuss your experiences. Um, Personally, for me, since the very beginning, I kind of established mindfulness as a part of my regular routine, and I don't have that issue very frequently. There are periods when I'm really grumpy and not very happy to sit and meditate. But to me, I've learned that this usually means that I'm avoiding something, that there is an emotion or something happening that I prefer not to know much about. So to me, as then I go into my therapy mode and I think, no, 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 now you're going to sit and meditate even longer and figure out what's happening. It does help to have a group. It helps to find a teacher as well. Many people who teach mindfulness from a sort of secular and let's say psychological point of view will charge for their services, so you might have to pay for a teacher. But in my experience, many Buddhist teachers who are far more experienced and better teachers than psychologists are will do it almost for free. Even some really quite famous teachers. There are online sanghas, which like Buddhist communities that will teach you for a very small donation. So you can find very affordable teachers or even completely free teachers for very easily. Just Google them. There's one, so I don't know where you're from, so I'm not really sure what the COVID situation is where you are, but there are even free retreats that you can take to learn mindfulness. There was a Indian and Burmese businessman called Goenka, Goenka, who was also a very famous Vipassana teacher in his time. And so he founded this network of retreats all over the world where you can go and get basically a free 10-day retreat where you can learn mindfulness. These are quite intense. You think you're going to lose your mind most of the time, but ultimately they're absolutely worth it and they're really remarkable experiences and they're completely free. They even feed you there. Not very well, but they do. So you can, I'm not sure what their website is, but if you type Goenka Vipassana retreats, you can easily find the website and you can apply for retreats really like all over the world, and you can learn it for free there as well. As a parent of a 15-year-old daughter, what advice do you have for getting her to open up about this? I ask to look at her head often to try and help and keep an eye on it. Also, what do you mean by body scan? Okay, so let's do the last question first and then the first question second. So a body scan is a specific type of mindfulness where instead of the breath as the object of meditation, you use different parts of your body. Most frequently, what you do is you start, let's say, from your head, and then you slowly and systematically move all the way to your toes, or vice versa. That depends who's guiding you. And then you focus on each part of your body, like on each finger, on every little part, and you just kind of see what's happening there, what sensations are present, if any, if something hurts, itches, whatever it is that you're feeling. So instead of focusing on the breath, you choose different body parts and you go through your entire body. Now, on to the first part of your question. My first suggestion would be to talk to your daughter and see what kind of help she needs. It's very unlikely that a 15-year-old girl in the Western society doesn't realize that hair pulling is a problem, because if it is affecting her appearance, I guess sadly, but she will be acutely aware that it's a problem. Sometimes adolescents, when you try to point it out to them, when you try to tell them you're pulling now, or don't pull, don't do this, stop, that will just make things worse. You can overwhelm her and stress her out that way, and then she will be even more anxious and even more stressed, and then she will pull even more. And also there is a chance that she will simply find a way to do it when you're not around. So I don't think by looking at her hair you can achieve much if that's not something that she finds helpful. The best thing to do is to talk to her and just flat out ask, how is it that she sees that? And then just listen. Ask her, what is it that she's trying to do to stop? Ask her what kind of help she needs. And if she wants you to point it out to her, then ask how. Sometimes people will not want to hear these words like you're pulling again. It is triggering in a sense, it's difficult. because you're fighting it every day, and then someone keeps reminding you that you're failing. So it's not very pleasant. See what way would be best for her. Maybe, I don't know, touch her on the shoulder, wink, say a keyword that you agree on, hold her hand, whatever she feels comfortable with. The key word being her. I know that as a parent, it must be incredibly difficult for you, but it cannot be more difficult for you than it is for her. So when you help her, it should be on her terms and in the way that she can accept your help. What in your experience are the reasons children develop trick? Mine started at 9 years old. Now I'm 35 and finally trying to get help. That's quite a complex question. There is a number of cases that number of clients that I've worked with where I really wasn't able to determine why is it they initially started. We were able to reconstruct what is it that pulling was useful for, but for some reason we were not able to discover what was happening when it first started. So in some cases it will remain unknown. Sometimes it's because of stress. Often it's because of social anxiety. I'm talking now, to my knowledge, there are no studies that actually classify this. I'm just telling you what my experience is. Sometimes it's because of family relations. Sometimes it's because of the way that you look at your body at that age, especially if it's something that's related to the onset of puberty. It can sometimes have to, it can be related to that as well. So it can be many different things. If you want to find out, what you can do is you can think about that period around when you were around 9 years old and think about what was happening. How did you feel? How did you feel about your body? Depending on where you pull, how did you actually specifically feel about that body part? Then one other thing that you can also explore is how did it feel to pull in the beginning? When were you pulling? Who did you pull in front of? It there all these small little details can guide you in the direction to see why is it that it started. It's very difficult when you're writing a paper for a peer-reviewed journal. You obviously want to generalize a little bit about experiences and kind of classify them. But since I work primarily as a therapist, I've learned to use these studies and this kind of information as just being very vague and preliminary. So I never assume that it's because of this and this. I really like to examine your personal experience. And if you can't find anything, you can talk to your parents or guardians or whoever was around you at the time and see what their perspective on you was. Especially I've noticed with anxiety is that people will say I was shy, and then shy really means very anxious. Or they will say I was an introvert, and then when you examine it a little bit, you will realize that it's not that they were an introvert, it's just that they had social anxiety, for example. And not that these two things are the same, it's just that we will growing up learn the wrong label for that. And also when people are anxious for a very long time, then there is always this level of anxiety that you're used to. So when you look back, your experience is the same because you were equally anxious, for example. So what you notice are these giant increases, but not the baseline level. And that also could have led to you pulling. So that's another thing to maybe keep in mind. Is there any way to prevent that relapse? So if this is the same person writing that asked before, if this is something that it's very important to figure out what is it that caused the relapse in the first place. So that is crucial, because if that's just a one-off situation, something astronomically rare, then there's really nothing you have to do except forgive yourself and move on. If it's something that indeed might be related to your period, or if it's a stressor that will repeat itself, then it's very important for you to try and anticipate it and prevent it. If you can avoid it, avoid it. If you can, if it's about a relationship with a person, try to set boundaries so that that relationship changes. Another thing that you can do, if it's not something you can predict, is to kind of structure in your head or on paper, what is it that you did in the past to stop pulling? So what techniques helped, what techniques didn't help, and those techniques that did help, where and how did they help? So you kind of arm yourself in advance with a protocol or an algorithm. What is it that you should do once you feel the urge to pull? So as soon as you find yourself in that situation, you can immediately reach for whatever will help you. There are some things, for example, that you can just carry around with you, like worry stones or bracelets, rosaries, or a spinner ring, whatever type of competing response that you use. It's very useful to keep it around. Sometimes, even if you don't use it, it just gives you a sense of, a little bit of like a portable sense of safety that you carry around with you. So that can also be very useful. But what I would primarily focus on is what caused the relapse, and then try to alter my circumstances when that situation arises next time. Thank you so much. It was especially helpful to hear that you can change. Yes, you can. Trick is very stubborn. In a sense, it's very stubborn because it is such an ingrained habit, and usually also because it's the one way that people have to either regulate their emotions or whatever else. But as soon as it's one way to do something, it makes it incredibly difficult to remove. But change is possible. And I don't like to spread this kind of false sense of optimism. I'm not a very optimistic person by nature, but of course the change is possible. I can repeat that several more times if necessary. Is hair pulling a way of wanting to hurt oneself, or like a form of self-harm? My answer is that it all depends. Strictly speaking, trichotillomania as a clinical entity in itself is not a form of self-harm. So it's a diagnosis for itself. Self-harm is usually a symptom that comes with other conditions. Most notably, for example, it comes with borderline personality disorder, some other personality disorders, and sometimes conditions like depression and body dysmorphia and so on. So they can overlap, and pulling can serve several functions, and one of them can be self-harm, but it is not always the case. In my experience, skin picking is more often a form of self-harm than hair pulling is. I would ask you, I don't know if you're still here. If you are, you can type your answer in the Q&A. What makes you think that it's a form of self-harm? Oh, you're here. I see you popped up. So just tell me, why is it that you think it's a form of self-harm? And if you can give me a little more details. Since you're anonymous, I wouldn't give your name anyway. So maybe if I have more details, I will understand it better. How common is it for trichotillomania to overlap with dermatillomania? Actually, it's quite common. I'm in about, I think, third up to half of the cases, you will have both trichotillomania and dermatillomania. It's the most common comorbidity for these two. So they come together very frequently. And they also belong to the same kind of wider group of body-focused repetitive behaviors. So they happen frequently, and when they happen frequently together, they have the same function as well. In acceptance and commitment therapy, which is not my default way of thinking, but it is the way that that TrichStop is structured. So that's a theoretical model that I work with a lot. One important concept that both hair pulling and skin picking share is something called experiential avoidance, meaning that you do this so that you wouldn't do something else. Sometimes people will pick their skin so that they wouldn't feel sadness, or they will pull their hair so that they don't feel anger, for example. They will pull their hair so that they don't feel stress, because if they don't know how to deal with these intense experiences, then hair pulling is something that allows these experiences to kind of disappear. If you remember that field of awareness from one of the previous slides, well, one thing that the experience of hair pulling and skin picking both that they give you is that whole wide circle of awareness kind of shrinks all the way and only to hair pulling or skin picking. So basically, people will describe that as falling into a trance. Maybe that's the wording that some of you also use. It's almost like the whole world stops existing, and the only thing there is to pick your skin or to pull your hair. So that's one way that you reduce your entire world to that experience, and then use that experience to gain temporary release. And then in your mind, you dealt with the emotion, you're fine, and then you can continue on. Whereas, of course, in reality, you just avoided the emotion and kind of released the pent-up energy, but the emotion and what it means to have that emotion is still not faced or not researched. So I hope that gives you an answer to your question. Sometimes when I'm mad at myself, or like you mentioned, being very hard on myself, I tend to pull my hair. I continue to do so consciously. Part of me knows of the consequences, but I still continue. Oh, this is why you meant to say that that it could be self-harm. Um, I still wouldn't be very quick to jump to conclusion, but at the end of the day, I guess it is self-harm because on a very surface level, you are harming yourself by doing that. But I can see from what you said that maybe pulling could be a way to punish yourself for something. That's what it sounds like to me. Uh, then maybe the practices that you can focus on could be different types of loving kindness or compassion practices. However, I would really caution you when you start doing them, start very slowly and start with very short practices, because especially when this kind of self-talk and this very kind of angry, hard attitude on yourself, when it's very intense and very present, and then suddenly you start practicing mindfulness that has to do with compassion or loving kindness, it can sometimes intensify these experiences of anger. It's almost like when you have a depressed person in front of you, and then you tell them, oh, cheer up, life is amazing. That's like the worst thing you can do, because it kind of exacerbates their feeling of helplessness. And so in the same way with this, I'm sorry for the strong word that I'm going to use, but if there's a lot of self-hatred, cultivating self-love can kind of emphasize the hatred because of the stark contrast. And also because the suddenly loving attitude that you're supposed to apply doesn't work very well. It seems unnatural. So the way to go is to maybe practice either forgiveness. That's one practice that can be very helpful, or practice loving kindness and compassion directed towards other people first, and then slowly direct it at yourself so that you kind of mellow down and and sort of soften up your own resistance towards it. But yes, I absolutely see your point and understand why is it that you see it as self-harm. Are you going to send us a list of resources for mindfulness? Yes, when you receive the email with the recording of the webinar, you will also receive a list of the books that I recommended and the apps that I mentioned. And I will also see if I can prepare, let's say, 1 or 2 guided meditations. Sadly, you will have to suffer with my voice, but I will see if I can prepare them so that you can have something to get you started without having to pay for anything, or without having to seek out anything additional. So with the books and the app and the guided meditations and the resources that I send, you should be ready to get started with mindfulness on your own. What about mindfulness for people who've had severe trauma? So yes, if you have PTSD currently, or you've experienced very intense and, let's say, big quote unquote trauma in the past, you might want to be careful about how you approach mindfulness. There are books about mindfulness for people who struggle with PTSD or trauma. So it's something that has been researched, and we pretty much know how to introduce that practice. Except that in that case, I would recommend that you find a qualified teacher rather than to do it on your own. But there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be able to meditate. In fact, the Veterans Administration has their own mindfulness app that you can download for free. So they use mindfulness themselves for PTSD and other mental health problems. it's really just, the trick is how to introduce it slowly and to have someone who will guide you through all the difficult experiences that will arise, and they inevitably will arise. So I just wouldn't do it on my own. That's all. Well, speaking of that, maybe it's also a good moment to point out that whereas mindfulness is good for most people, uh, sometimes, like in this instance, in case of PTSD, or if you have a psychotic disorder diagnosed, like schizophrenia or anything on that spectrum, you might want to first consult your psychiatrist before trying mindfulness. Again, there are ways that you can do it. It's just that you need qualified guidance, and I wouldn't try to do it on my own. Even though mindfulness typically doesn't really have serious side effects, it is not without any side effects at all. So there are some conditions when it's really important to be uh, mindful, when it's important to be very careful about how you approach the practice. And also, one more thing, in these cases, if you're looking for teachers for these, let's say, special cases, um, I would first check what are the qualifications of my teacher. I find that today people can easily become certified mindfulness teachers, where they really know nothing about psychology, they know very little about mental health, and they also don't really even have that much experience practicing mindfulness. So not just because someone is a certified teacher doesn't make them a good teacher. Uh, what I would do in these cases is make sure that my teacher is also a therapist or a psychiatrist. There are mindfulness teachers out there who are also qualified mental health professionals. One big name that comes to my mind is Mark Epstein, who is a psychiatrist and I believe a psychoanalyst, and he's also a great mindfulness teacher. And he has a great book about mindfulness that also, if you're interested in something that kind of blends attachment theory and mindfulness and all these kinds of things, it's called Falling to Pieces Without Falling Apart. Yeah, something like this, something like along those lines. I'm paraphrasing now. It's quite a good book. Or at least make sure that if your teacher is not a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist, and if they're just like an ordinary person, Buddhists have an entire psychology that comes along, so they're incredibly qualified teachers. Buddhist monks are incredible teachers, even if they're not psychotherapists or psychiatrists. Just make sure that your teacher is both knows what they're doing and also has a lot of personal experience. There's mindfulness is not something that you can learn from 5 textbooks. It's not geography and then you can memorize all 50 states and there you go. So in order to teach mindfulness, you have to have a lot of personal experience with it. I gave you an example before, and I said that I've been practicing mindfulness for about 10 years now, and I've only been teaching for the past 2 years, because before that, I did want to teach mindfulness because that's something that I usually do for free in groups, and I just enjoy that. But I really didn't feel qualified because I didn't feel that I have enough of my own experience to be able to help people. So experience is incredibly important when you're looking for a mindfulness teacher. Does perfectionism trigger trichotillomania? I would say that perfectionism is something that comes along with trichotillomania. I wouldn't say that perfectionism is a trigger, because mostly I would say that it's something imperfect that it's the trigger because of perfectionism. But perfectionism and trichotillomania very frequently go hand in hand, yes. And in my experience, in order to successfully deal with trichotillomania, you need to attack perfectionism as well. So competing responses in these behavioral techniques can help with trichotillomania, but the long-term solution is always to deal with perfectionism. And that's also something that mindfulness can actually be quite helpful with. Have you found that childhood trauma has a correlation with trichotillomania? For me personally, my hair pulling began when I was a child as a way to relieve stress while undergoing an extremely abusive situation with a family member that I felt at the time was unable to change and had no way to feel any type of solace. After repeatedly doing so, it became a habit and really ingrained in my daily life. And now I found myself even doing so when I'm just bored or while trying to focus on something else, despite being conscious of it and even more so during times of stress. Well, you said it better than I can. Absolutely, yes. Especially when this is also my addendum to a previous question about mindfulness that has onset in childhood. Very often, and we know this also from psychological theory, not just from my clinical experience, is that hair pulling can be a way to self-soothe. So if when you're little and you find yourself in extremely stressful and traumatic circumstances, that is a way to help yourself in that moment. And when something like that happens when we're little, it really does become a very deeply ingrained habit. There are also stats, and I showed this in one of the earlier webinars, that trichotillomania that has onset in childhood is usually more difficult to treat because it has been present for so long and it's so deeply ingrained. It's of course not impossible, but it's this aspect of automatic pulling that's challenging in that situation. So maybe the first step for you, it would be to sort of infuse as much awareness as you can in the automatic aspects of pulling. And then when you become aware of them, slowly introduce competing responses to try to get them under control. Is trichotillomania linked with OCD? I find that I focus on hairs with extremely bumpy, twisted textures and have an uncontrollable need to pull these. Is this common? So trichotillomania and OCD are obviously different conditions, but you really don't need to have PhD in neuroscience to realize that they overlap quite a lot. There just so happens to be neuroscience to support the fact that they overlap. And I also talked about this in one of the previous webinars, that there are certain brain structures that behave in a similar way in both conditions. So they're two different conditions, but they are quite similar. And sometimes they go hand in hand as well. The most common comorbidity is trichotillomania with skin picking, and then I think the second most common or the third most common co-occurring condition is OCD. So to answer your question briefly, yes, it is common, and yes, it is linked to OCD sometimes. Absolutely. Okay, so I think this might be, I answered all the questions that are that have arrived so far. So I think this would maybe be oh, there's another question. Let me answer that one as well while I'm here. Is the ultimate solution to resolve the underlying emotional issue that led to trich? Mindfulness is more a part of management and reduction. So I think the ultimate solution is always to go for the root cause, absolutely. I think behavioral techniques will help, but they are just kind of primitive tools as opposed to true ways of transforming yourself. This is why TrichStop's, for example, has two parts. One part is the behavioral part, and then the other part is the acceptance and commitment part. So you do get to identify the issues that are behind it as well. Since it's only an 8-week program, I do have to say you don't get to resolve childhood trauma in 8 weeks, but at least you know where to proceed. Absolutely, I agree with you there. However, I don't agree that mindfulness is more a part of management and reduction. Mindfulness can play a part in that as well, but it all depends on how you use it. For me, the fact that you will be less anxious, less stressed, more resilient and all that, that's all really great and nice. But for me, the ultimate value of mindfulness is in the fact that it gives you direct access to your psyche. It shows in real time how your psyche works when you pull. And it's actually a very good window in those underlying emotional issues. So in that sense, mindfulness may not be the solution, but it's most certainly the magnifying glass that will show you exactly what the underlying issue is. And also, one of the benefits of mindfulness, if you remember from one of the previous slides, is that it helps with emotional regulation. So whereas it will not resolve your childhood trauma, because it's not a magic pill, it will help you cope with it. So it is something that will also assist in this deeper part of the problem. Let's put it that way. Okay, so that was the last question. So thank you very much, and I hope you join me next month as well. The topic that we'll talk about is habit formation and habit reversal, and I'll try to make it a very practical webinar about how to establish new habits, and how to change old habits. And I'll try to focus on what science has to say and see if I can offer some useful advice. That's, I feel, useful as an extension of talking about mindfulness and how to implement mindfulness. And also at the same time, it's one of the core things that we deal with when we deal with trichotillomania, right? It's how to get rid of one habit and then replace it with a more practical and healthier habit. So that will be our topic in September. You will be notified by email about what exactly when exactly the date will be. Thank you for your attention and for sticking with me for so long. And I hope to see you next month. So have a nice evening, day, morning, wherever you are. Bye.